What's up, y'all? You're checking out Living Corporate on YouTube. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell in that corner so you keep up to date with all the dope content we're creating here, driving real talk in the corporate world.
We see all over this guy's social media pejorative, misogynistic content about women that had we seen it, we never would have brought this guy on board. And this was more than a decade ago at this point, right? And so, when I started FAMA, that very much is like the steel thread, in the product today, which is essentially helping companies identify workplace misconduct, via online screening. So our whole thing is like, we aren't helping sort of solve the qualified, does this person have the skill set, the experience, et cetera, but much more quality of hire, right? Are they going to work with your customers and extend your brand in their eyes, right? Are they going to be a contributing member to a great company culture? So a lot of the stuff of, intolerance, threats, harassment, all of it, the signs of that misconduct are available online in 2023, and we provide the tools to help employers, integrate that in a compliant way into their screening process. So that's what FAMA does.
That's incredible. I mean, what's also, I'll say, notable to me is there was a significant error, right, in hiring. There was trauma that was created that had, to your point, material impact on your people and your business. And as opposed to like, I don't know, doing this awkward dance, frankly, that a lot of majority leaders do, and like scapegoating or sidestepping or whatever, it was a wait a minute, no, something is wrong here. We need to not, like, this cannot happen again. I'm curious, like, to that end, like, to those for those unfamiliar, can you explain in simple terms what FAMA does?
Yeah. So really, we're of the mindset that, as I was saying, that the shape of misconduct, how it presents itself, signals of this sort of like, behavior that damages workplaces, that has that impact, right? As we live so much of our lives online, spend so much time, even you and I, right, connecting here over this Zoom, over, or this Squadcast, like, we're interacting in digital environments, right? And this is like a good proxy to consider how so many of us interact, whether it's on social media with one another or simply, who we are in text, image, and video, right? Not our analog, physical, human blob selves, but who we are in this sort of digital sense, this digital context. And that is really the expansion, I'd say, of that arena of like business, commerce, hanging out, getting together. Essentially means that while there's a lot of good, like we get the dog pigs, the check-in at games, right? The different things, the checking in on family that we use online social media for, who we are on the internet, finding new information, also means there's a lot of risk out there, right? And so what FAMA does is we essentially allow companies to identify, say, hey, these are the things types of misconduct that are important to me. I'm hiring an exec. I want to know about any reference to, call it civil litigation in their background related to harassment. I want to know if they've said anything, intolerant, threatening, harassing online that might alienate customers. Maybe it's going to alienate, people who work with me, make good people want to leave, right? And so, FAMA, when it comes down to what we do, is we help identify that sort of information on behalf of employers, executive search firms, investors, et cetera, who are essentially trying to make sure that the people they bring into their organizations are going to drive, the future of that organization, not detract from it. So, we don't score. We don't give you like a yes or a no, who's a good person, who's a bad person. But what we're really good at is finding a person's complete web presence, filtering through it, and only pulling out the sort of hits or flags that map to one of a company's risk criteria. So the bottom line is like, there's some, like, I'd say like Orwellian, like Big Brother overtones that some people see with FAMA sometimes. But the reality is like no employers care if you're like swearing online or if you're posting like a red Solo cup. And even these days, a lot of employers don't care if you've got a picture of you, smoking weed or something like that, because so much of that is now legal, right? So much of that is, just part of the standard fabric of society overall. So we only pull in the stuff that, really represents, I would say, that sort of sense of misconduct. And that's really where FAMA operates today.
It's interesting, right? Because like one of the first things when we initially, like Living Corporate initially met, like with the FAMA team, like I was asking about like what are the determinations of like what goes into it or not, right? Because so many, so often, especially when you think about like historically marginalized communities, like it's like there's certain things that may be seen as like potentially offensive or problematic, and it's like, is it really right? So like, if you sit back and you say like, hey, my grandfather was a Black Panther, and they were active in providing food to the children in Oakland, and they post a bunch of pictures of like their grandfather, or like, hey, I'm really passionate about this work and this history of the community service, or whatever the case is. Like, it's like stuff like that is like, hey, like, what does it look like to make sure that there is some level of like cultural awareness and sensitivity of what actually gets pulled or flagged, you know? Like, that's, to me, when I think about like the future of the space, and I think about, you know, I do get it, to your point about like this concept of like Orwellian, Big Brother, overlooking, invasive, but like the reality is we're in the age of information, and so like there has to be some level of analysis as to the things that you do. Plus, I mean, everybody lives off the internet now, Ben. I don't know if it's like no one has any personal business anymore. You have to post it online. But I guess I would say, like, what would you say to that? The relation of like and how would you say FAMA is considerate of like cultural context of the things they pull in for people's profiles?
Yeah, you know, I'll lean into it even more. You know, I think there's the first piece that you mentioned of like the context and the subjectivity, right? Of, you know, there are very specific definitions we have for things like harassment, right? Threats, violence, right? Where, you know, for example, supporting causes, you know, historical causes, for example, there's a whole like taxonomy of what's in and what's out, right? And so the specific example you gave, I think certainly wouldn't be flagged, but to tell you, you know, big on one of our values, FAMA, transparency, the journey we've been on, and this is, you know, on the internet, you can find it. But we used to, you know, as a company, one of the things that we ran into early on was like, you know, we were looking at ways that we could build for the community of people that we serve, customers we have, making sure the people they're hiring, that we're screening in a way that's reflective of, you know, the makeup, essentially, the people coming into these companies using the software. And so even, you know, using that cultural sensitivity piece, there was a period where we used to flag every instance of the N-word as intolerance, right? We used to think, you know, put that on every report, right? And then we start running our analysis. We're like, wait a second, like we're unfairly potentially flagging, you know, Black people effectively for using this word in a colloquial, like, you know, obviously there's a lot of weight to that word, who uses it, what context, when, et cetera. But like the way that we looked at it, we said, we did the analysis, check this out. That term is used more than dude and bro on Twitter.
That's true.
So, you know, this is one of these things, right? That like, if suddenly you start flagging for these sorts of, you know, terms as intolerant, then reality is you're going to flag Black people more than white people for intolerance, when in fact, that's not intolerance, you know, in the scope of what intolerance actually is by definition, right? So that's an evolution that we crossed, you know, about 5 years ago or so at this point. But that's part of the journey you go on as a tech company, is figuring out like facing those sorts of issues, those changes in the product, right? So that you can ensure that the solution itself is reflective of the value that you propose to provide. So making changes like that, right? Of like, you know, making sure we're not using that word in an intolerant context. That's a hot topic for sure at the time, but now it's just like standard in what we do. And
so a couple things here. First off, I want to shout out to you for having the wisdom and insight to mention the N-word, but not saying the N-word to a Black guest. That's smart. And I love the fact that you brought that up. 2, you're right. Black people say nigga a lot. In fact, I say it every day. It keeps my teeth relatively white.